We are outside the Jensen Center on this warm February day. We're going to look at conifer needles today, and we're going to start with white pine. And all true pines, a lot of people call anything that has needles a pine, when in fact there are pines and there are spruce and firs and hemlocks and others. But the true pines always have needles in a cluster of either two. Some pines 2 needles per cluster, some pines 3 per cluster, and some pines, like white pine, 5 per cluster. So they're joined at the base by a sheath, and always on a white pine, there are 5 needles in that cluster. So white pine is one of the 5 needle pines. Our other native pine in Door County that we won't see today, there are some that grow right along the edge of the escarpment at the clearing. Red pine, again, also native in Door County. That's a 2 needle pine, always in clusters of 2, usually about twice as long as white pine needles, and thicker, more robust, darker green. And red pine is might be the only pine species, and there are many dozens of pine species. Red pine's the one that if you bend it, it will actually break in half. The other pines won't do that. So white pine, always 5 needles per cluster. Red pine, 2 per cluster. This is balsam fir. It's the one native fir in Door County. As you can see, much shorter needles than white pine, and the needles are single on every other evergreen, every other conifer except pines, where they're always in clusters. And balsam fir needles, all fir needles, are flat. So fir is flat. If you try to roll one in your fingertip, it won't roll. And it's the one that if you crush it, it smells like Christmas. This is the Christmas tree, the most common Christmas tree. If this were a spruce, because people often confuse spruce, so we have white and black spruce in Door County, a few white spruce at the clearing, and they look a little bit similar, but spruce needles are square. Spruce are square, fir are flat, and if you take a spruce needle and try to roll it between your thumb and finger, it'll roll. Fir needles are flat, they won't roll. And fir needles are blunt tipped, and spruce needles are sharp tipped. And when you crush a spruce needle, either white spruce or black spruce, it doesn't smell nearly as nice as the Christmas tree scented balsam fir. Well, here we have Canada hemlock, or just plain hemlock. Needles similar to balsam fir, but about half the length, but they're also flat. And I didn't show you on balsam fir, but it's the same on that. Underside is silvery. If you look closely, there are 2 white stripes, and those white stripes are the stomata, the gas exchange organs on leaves. So much different color from top side to bottom side. Again, similar to balsam fir, but much shorter. And you can't see it even if you got it close up, but the hemlock needles are attached by a very short stalk to the twig, about a 1/16 of an inch, not even that, maybe a 32nd of an inch long. All other conifer needles attach directly to the twig, but there's a little stalk at the attachment where hemlock needles join the twig. So Canada hemlock, darker on the top and silvery on the bottom, and very short. Moving along now to Arborvitae, or white cedar, or a lot of people just call it just plain cedar, but this is not a true cedar. Those grow in another part of the world. I learned this is Arborvitae, tree of life, that's what I call it. And you can see a much different foliage than what we've seen so far. More like scaly versus needle-like, and in these flat sprays, almost fern-like. And this also has a pleasant odor. We talked about balsam fir and a Christmassy scent. This smells kind of citrusy. So a pleasant scent. Lots of different creatures, deer in particular, like to eat the foliage of Arborvitae. But again, this much different type of needle, more like a scale, soft, in these flat, kind of fern-like arrangements. Arborvitae, or white cedar. Our last conifer today is common juniper, or old field common juniper. And it has needles that are kind of prickly, but junipers have two kinds of foliage. They have what's called juvenile foliage, and that predominates on old field common juniper, which is very prickly, but they also have more scaly foliage on some species that isn't prickly. But it's mostly prickly on old field common juniper, and you can see the winter color is not bright green. It'll change in April and May to its summer color, a much better green, and it goes off color in fall for its winter color. A lot of people don't like that. That's just what it does. But again, prickly foliage on old field common juniper, off color in winter. You can also probably get an idea that the top side, like on Canada hemlock and balsam fir, is one color, in this case kind of an olive green in winter, but the underside is also silvery with those lines of stomata, those gas exchange organs. And this is by far the most common conifer in Door County. A lot of people don't like it at all because it's prickly, goes off color. It can really get to be big and kind of take over a meadow. But it's a very important plant in the transition from a farm field or a pasture to ultimately forest. It's a classic nurse plant. It'll nurse seedling and sapling trees, keep the deer and rabbits away, deer especially, and then ultimately it gets shaded out by the trees that grow in amongst it. So it's a very valuable plant in forest regeneration, common juniper or old field common juniper.